The past, they say, isn't gone. It's just been buried. Buried under mud, under new borders, and under a version of history carefully designed to make us forget who we might have been, or what might have been taken from us. What if there really was an advanced global empire that once covered half the map, and then almost every trace of it was erased in less than a century? Some people believe that buried world had a name, Tartaria, an empire so vast it appeared on maps for hundreds of years, and then suddenly it didn't. Was it just a label for unknown land? Or did someone deliberately cut it out of our story? Before we start pulling on that thread and possibly unraveling your entire view of history, do me a favor. If you're curious enough to keep going, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. It takes a second, but it tells the algorithm this is worth sharing. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. You're watching Sleep In Historian. Now let's go looking for the empire lost to time. We begin with something simple. Old maps. Not myths, not hearsay. Ink on paper, produced by some of the most respected mapmakers in history. For centuries, European atlases clearly labeled a huge region across northern and central Asia as Tartary or Tartaria. It wasn't drawn as a vague blank space. It had borders, cities, and subregions, like Great Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and Independent Tartary. Why give that much detail to a place that supposedly didn't exist? The official answer says this was just a catch-all word Europeans used for lands they didn't really understand. Home to various Turkic and Mongolic peoples, nomads on horseback roaming the steppe. As knowledge improved and empires expanded, the term faded away, replaced by names like Russia, Siberia, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan. Under this view, the maps didn't erase an empire. They just got more accurate. But if it was just a lazy label, why did rival nations, competing explorers, and different languages all agree to draw the same giant Tartary for so long, and then drop it almost at the same time? For some researchers, that's where the placeholder explanation starts to feel a little too neat. They see the sudden disappearance of Tartaria from maps as the first clue in a much bigger cover-up. In their version of events, Tartaria wasn't a vague unknown. It was a powerful, advanced civilization, maybe the true heir to older lost cultures, and the world we live in only exists because that one was deliberately wiped away. If that sounds extreme, just wait until we look at the buildings. According to this theory, you don't have to dig into the ground to find Tartaria. You just have to look up at the impossible architecture of the 19th century, the grand world's fairs, the massive palaces, exhibition halls, and temporary cities that seem to appear out of nowhere and disappear just as fast. Take the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the famous White City. Officially, we're told that in just about 2 years on swampy land, architects and builders created more than 200 neoclassical buildings, monumental bridges, canals, statues, and the largest building in the world at the time. All with horses, steam engines, and 19th century tools. Then, after a year or so of use, most of it was torn down or destroyed by fire. We're also told these structures were basically huge movie sets, made from a cheap, plaster-like material over simple frames. That's why they could rise so fast and vanish just as quickly. But when you look at the photos, the buildings don't look like stage props. The domes, arches, and facades seem solid, like they were meant to last centuries, not months. So were they really all thrown together and then thrown away? Or were they already there? The Tartaria theory flips the whole story on its head. It claims the so-called temporary fairgrounds in Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco, and elsewhere weren't new at all. They were the surviving fragments of Tartarian cities, cleaned up, repainted, showcased to the public one last time, and then quietly demolished to erase the evidence. The world's fairs weren't celebrations of progress. They were funerals for a civilization the public wasn't allowed to remember. If that's true, then we're not looking at impressive 19th century construction. We're looking at a crime scene and the cleanup. But if there really was a whole other civilization before us, something had to happen to their world, something big enough to bury it. Literally. Enter the mud flood. Walk through the old parts of cities across Europe, North America, and beyond, and you start seeing a strange pattern. Doors and windows half buried below street level. Basements with ornate windows that clearly used to face open air. Stairways that now go down instead of up, like the ground simply rose around them. Mainstream history explains this as the natural result of cities being rebuilt, streets raised, and infrastructure layered over time. Tartaria believers think that's only part of the story, or not the story at all. They argue that these half-buried levels are the scars of a global catastrophe, a sudden wave of mud and debris that engulfed cities worldwide sometime in the 1800s, turning first floors into basements and burying entire districts overnight. Not a local landslide, a planet-wide event. In their telling, this mud flood wiped out most of Tartaria's population and left their once thriving cities partially submerged. The survivors, whoever they were, dug out what they could, reused what remained, and someone else stepped in to rewrite the narrative of what had just vanished. If all of this feels overwhelming, remember, we're still only looking at the stage. We haven't asked who built it, or who it was built for. Look closely at many of these old buildings, the cathedrals, capitals, opera houses, city halls, and another odd detail jumps out. The doors are huge. The ceilings are absurdly high. Stair steps are slightly too tall to be comfortable. Fireplace mantels tower over normal human height. We're told this is monumental architecture, designed to impress and intimidate, to make ordinary people feel small. That's one explanation. The Tartaria idea offers another. Maybe the proportions feel wrong because we weren't the original users. Maybe these structures were built to fit a different kind of human. A larger one. That's where the theory takes a wild leap into the world of giants. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across the United States and elsewhere occasionally reported discoveries of unusually large human skeletons, 7, 8, even 9 feet tall, found in ancient mounds or burial sites. Many articles claimed these remains were shipped off to major institutions, including the Smithsonian, and then never heard from again. Mainstream historians say these stories were exaggerations, hoaxes, or misinterpretations, and that genuinely tall skeletons can be explained by rare medical conditions. No museum today displays a verified 9-foot human skeleton. To science, that absence is proof enough. To believers, the absence is the proof, evidence of a deliberate effort to hide any trace of a giant race that once walked among us, and may have built cities to their own scale. But architecture, mud, and maps aren't the only pieces of this puzzle. If a whole civilization was wiped out, someone else had to inherit the ruins. And some say that someone was us, but not in the way you might think. Look again at many old photographs from the 1800s. Massive avenues and squares sit almost empty. Streets in major cities show detailed buildings, but very few people, sometimes none at all. Part of that is just early photography. Long exposures blur moving figures into ghosts or erase them entirely. That's the official explanation. Yet to those who see a pattern, these quiet cityscapes look less like bustling capitals and more like freshly cleaned sets, waiting for a new cast. They tie this haunting emptiness to a real historical program, the orphan trains. From the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, hundreds of thousands of children were moved from crowded eastern cities across the United States to rural families in the West and Midwest. Officially, it was a response to poverty, disease, and overcrowding, an attempt, however flawed, to give abandoned or orphaned kids a chance at a new life. In the Tartarian reset story, those children become something else entirely, the first generation of a new humanity, distributed like seeds into half-empty towns and cities that didn't originally belong to them. Combined with images of rows of infants in early incubators and foundling hospitals, this morphs into a chilling claim that after the old world fell, a new population was artificially grown, given no real past, and placed into the ruins of a lost empire. If that sounds like science fiction, that's exactly how it feels. A reset button pressed on human history, and an entire planet quietly repopulated with people who would never know what came before. At the center of all this is one core idea: control, not just of land, buildings, or energy, but of memory itself. In the Tartaria narrative, the old empire wasn't just advanced in a technological sense, it was spiritually and socially different. Its cities with domes, spires, and star-shaped forts weren't just pretty or defensive. They were part of a worldwide energy system. Some believers argue these structures were designed to tap into natural electromagnetic currents, or a kind of etheric energy in the air. They point to repeating patterns, domes, towers, metal finials, and careful geometry, and suggest these were the components of a forgotten free energy technology, one that powered lighting, heating, maybe even healing, without wires, smoke, or fuel. In that light, later inventors like Nikola Tesla stop being lone geniuses and start looking like rediscoverers of a lost science. His ideas about wireless power and tapping energy from the earth and sky become echoes of something older, something taken away. And if you accept that idea, a darker motive emerges. A world built on infinite shared energy doesn't need oil barons, utility companies, or centralized grids. It doesn't force people into lives built around paying for power, fuel, and basic survival. You can't easily control a population that isn't dependent on you for light and heat. So, in this theory, Tartaria had to go. Its technology had to be destroyed or disguised. Its buildings had to be stripped of function and turned into monuments, museums, churches, or government offices. Its history had to be rewritten as normal architecture from the 1800s built by the same struggling ancestors. We're told only crawled slowly out of ignorance thanks to steam engines and factories. The end result? A world like ours, powered by scarcity instead of abundance, taught that progress is fragile and recent, and that without the systems now in charge, we'd have nothing. Now, step back for a moment. Is any of this proven? No. Mainstream historians reject almost every major claim in the Tartaria story. They have explanations, some strong, some maybe less satisfying, for the maps, the architecture, the buried doors, the old newspaper clippings. Archaeology, geology, engineering, and archival records paint a picture of history that doesn't need a vanished empire of giants, a worldwide mud flood, or a secret reset to make sense. But whether you see Tartaria as a real hidden chapter or as a modern myth born from internet rabbit holes, it's doing something powerful. It's making people question the stories they've always been told. Maybe that's the real reason this theory hits so hard. Deep down, many of us feel that something about our world is off. We live in cities full of beautiful old buildings nobody seems to truly understand. We work constantly just to afford basic energy and shelter on a planet overflowing with resources. We're surrounded by history, yet our personal connection to it often stops just a few generations back. Like there's a wall of fog behind our grandparents' stories. A theory like Tartaria steps into that fog and says, what if the reason you feel like something's missing is because something was taken? In the end, you're the jury here. Was Tartaria an advanced global civilization powered by free energy, inhabited by beings larger and more capable than us, wiped out by a coordinated disaster and buried under a new timeline? Are we living in their recycled cities, walking past their technology every day without realizing it? Because someone decided we should never know? Or is Tartaria just a name on old maps, a quirk of cartography and language? Are the grand buildings of the 19th century exactly what we've been told? Impressive but human achievements, built by our great-great-grandparents with sweat, ingenuity, and early industrial power. Are the sunken doors and empty streets just the messy side effects of urban growth and primitive photography? Maybe the truth is less dramatic and still important. Maybe our history is mostly right, with a few missing chapters still waiting to be found. Or maybe we simply need stories like this, especially now, to make sense of a world that often feels controlled, fragile, and strangely disconnected from its own roots. Whatever you decide, the mystery of the empire lost to time is doing exactly what history should do. It's making you look twice at the world around you. So what do you think? Is there a hidden chapter of humanity buried beneath our cities and our textbooks? Or are we just very good at telling ourselves haunted stories when the real past feels too ordinary? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the strangest corners of history and myth, you know where to find me, right here on Sleeping Historian.